I graduated in 2014, and in 2016, a doctor said, you have multiple sclerosis. So that was like a defining point for me
Got it.
in 2016.
What kinds of signs and symptoms did you know that something was kind of wrong?
There's such a random amount of symptoms for someone who is starting with MS. It started, I was driving in a car and I felt like I was flying in a plane. I felt like I was going up and down, like these strange sensations. I had trouble balancing. My vision was a little wonky, a little bit strange. Reading was difficult, following the lines on reading a book, like I would be skipping lines. And then what happened was I started getting this speech thing that would happen. And it happened when someone asked me a question. So, in other words, when I was in class, I was always the annoying person in the back of the room raising my hand, answering a question. And I go to answer the question, and I would get like a slurred speech. So that was troubling. And all of these things kind of added up. And I went to a doctor and he said, well, I see on your MRI, because he took an MRI, I see that there are some lesions, which that word was pretty scary. And he said, but, there's not many. And let's take another MRI in 8 months. So I waited and I took another MRI. And then meanwhile, I was getting tons of vertigo symptoms, like spinning. It was just ridiculous. So I went to a PCP that said, "No, I don't think it's related to the MRI that you had. I think it's vertigo. Let's just keep an eye on it." So everyone just wanted to keep an eye on everything. No one wanted to diagnose me. Not that I even wanted a diagnosis, but I just wanted to know what was going on. So it was February of 2016 after several tests, nerve conduction tests, a test where they put you in a chair and spun it around to see how you would do, and that was a nightmare. And a spinal tap, but it was an eye doctor that diagnosed me with multiple sclerosis in February of 2016.
Wow.
So
The
that
diagnosis that sounds terrible. The things they had to do does not sound fun.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole thing was terrible. Getting the diagnosis was horrible. The test that led to it, and then having someone say that to you was horrible because they make sure they tell you there is no cure. We can only give you these very strong medications that may help it not to progress. Only 40% chance, the highest medication, that it won't progress to the next level. And there is no cure, and it's only going to get worse.
Wow.
So that in itself is enough. That's bad.
Okay, so I've got a client. Her father was, diagnosed with something really challenging. And basically, he did a few rounds of treatment, and the doctor basically told him that there's nothing else they could do. They tried everything. It's going to get worse. And he's basically like, go home, get your things in order. You mentioned hospice. And my client described the father as like sitting up in his chair and, being alert and aware and just slumping and slumping and slumping and slumping into a full on like trauma posture, and says that he's been like in his chair for the last week and a half doing nothing
Mm,
because they told him in a way that provides like absolutely no hope. And
right.
I kept questioning her, like, I know they need to communicate that these things are challenging, but is there a way to maybe communicate this a little bit better to not take hope away from somebody? Like, he's going to die of hopelessness more than he's going to die of this disease. It sounds like it was presented to you in a very similar way.
Yeah. And I think it was presented to me because I kept on searching for something, you know? And I think it comes from being in the background that I was, being an exercise person, being a diet person, being, searching for all these answers and going back to school as an adult and learning and reading studies and all of that. I was like, there's got to be something I could do, right? There's got to be something. Is there some kind of diet? Because I saw all these different diets. I followed the Walls diet. I did that for a while. Oh no, that won't help you. There's nothing that will help. Like they're so definitely sure you can try it. It might make you feel better, but it's not going to cure the multiple sclerosis.
Wow.
So I just wouldn't accept that, Casey. I could not accept that. I tried everything. I did all kinds of searching, and I suppose, it was like 9 years between the time that I got the diagnosis and the time when I started the carnivore diet. So I wasn't searching the entire 9 years, but there came a time, 2022, it was August. I'm coming up on that anniversary now, that we had just gone through the time where clinicians had to go online because we couldn't meet people face to face. And I had an office, and I ended up closing that office and met with all my clients face to face. And it was just, I was getting more and more fatigued. My brain fog was getting worse and worse. I could feel the downturn in how I was behaving, how I was reacting, how I was moving. I've always been very aware of my body, and I've always been an exerciser, always lifted weights, all of that, but it was becoming more and more challenging to do those things. And I had a conversation with my husband, and I said, I think I'm going to have to take a sabbatical. I thought it was going to be like a couple of weeks, maybe a month, to kind of like regroup, maybe do some meditation, maybe do some, I don't know. I was trying to figure something out. But those 2 weeks, 4 weeks turned into 3 years. I didn't work from that point on because I had to heal myself, and I did some searching. And it wasn't until the fall of 2023 that I really, I had, it was like I couldn't stand it anymore. And I just really cried out to God, and I said, please heal this MS. And shortly after that, I think it was Ken Berry that I saw his video on healing autoimmune disease came on. I went to YouTube, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. All meat? I can't do all meat. That's ridiculous. That is crazy. So I just kept on watching, but I wasn't buying it. I was like, you have to eat vegetables. I had already given up the carb thing, right? Because I was sensitive to carbohydrates, and I had plantar fasciitis for years. And so, yeah, I knew that it helped with that. And I had a few things like eczema, and, it helped with my weight to give up the carbs. So I had already given them up, but I was eating the low carb vegetables, side salad. And it wasn't until March 5th, 2024, that I decided to give up the side salad, give up the broccoli and the cauliflower, and give this thing a try, because there would be no way of knowing if this thing worked unless I tried it 100%. And I had to be ready to try it 100%. And and I'll remember this, Casey, because usually every diet that I've ever been on has started on a Monday. I'm sure all your listeners know. You
Of
have a
course.
weekend and you're like, okay, Monday I'm going to do it. This was a Tuesday, and you can look it up to, fact check me. It was Tuesday, March 5th, 2024, that I woke up and I said, no, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it.
Wow.
And I went out and bought my meat, and I only ate meat. And 3 weeks later, my brain fog lifted, my fatigue started to leave me. And it was that 3 week mark that it was just unbelievable. It was like I went to bed one day, woke up the next day, and things were totally different. Like I was living in a different reality. It was
Wow.
just amazing. It
It's
was
incredible.
undeniable.